What's that?
Yeah.
So we'll do it. Not me. Taxpayers here. So we're scheduled to rest that up. Paid off the bonds. Go. It's got a cheap rate, hasn't it?
All right, guys, we're going to call this meeting to order. It is, what, 5:32 or 1 or something like that. Just a reminder, the information, this group is to inform the public about the location of the Open Meetings Act, council chamber, and accessible to all members. Sorry, butchered that. I cut that up. Anyway, we'll do a roll call quick. Roll call left, or go ahead.
Cox.
Here.
Einspar.
Here.
Caney.
Here.
Lindsay.
Here.
McKenzie.
Here.
Shukai.
Here.
J. Sehi. S. Sehi.
Yes. Here.
Steiner.
Here.
Waite.
Here.
Wyrick.
Here.
Williams.
Here.
Okay, all right. We have, the group was handed the minutes from the last meeting. We need to ask for an approval for the April 30th meeting, so a motion to approve minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstain? All right, motion carries. All right, the first thing we have on the agenda today is we have Jeff with the county assessor's office in here, and we'd like to invite Jeff up to maybe, and we have some questions. Last time we talked a little bit about valuations and different things, and so we had asked Jeff to come up and maybe answer questions if there was any questions or better understanding on the process, how valuations work, both maybe TIF and non-TIF projects. So if Jeff, if you would like to come up, that'd be great. I'll tell the guys in the group, Jeff has some time constraints tonight as well, so we'll try to be as efficient as we can with his time and utilize it as much as we can. But all right. So as we do this, we want to break down and get a deeper understanding on just how the TIF, all the process works. We'll get in pretty soon with Randy and into some of the details from a city standpoint on the flow. But from the valuation standpoint, we would like to understand that. There was some stuff that came out at the last meeting that we wanted to clarify, I guess, so.
Sure. I kind of prepared a little bit. It's not very good. I did it quickly. And I do apologize. I thought the meeting tonight was at 5. I said I have some family family member with some surgery, so I needed to go, and yeah, now I'm really pressed for time, but that's neither here nor there. So I'll just start going through this, if that's all right? Okay. Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jeff Hackard. I'm the county assessor here in Madison County. I do appreciate you putting me first on the agenda. I just kind of alluded to that. What is TIF? TIF is a development tool designed to encourage private investment in public development. The primary intent of the law or the program is to assist developers in financing the public costs or the infrastructure costs associated with the development. These costs can be for engineering, grading, streets, sanitary sewer, etc. First, a quick synopsis of how the TIF project works in general. And I'm not going to get into the weeds in this because a lot of this process takes place before it ever gets to me or to my office. So some of that's outside of my purvey. Typically, a developer will bring a project to the city or the Community Redevelopment Authority, which we call the CRA. After a few meetings and some due diligence, the city or the CRA may declare an area blighted or substandard. Those terms have kind of been replaced recently with the term underdeveloped. This law has changed through the years. Some of the terminology has changed. I guess some of the requirements have probably changed a little bit as well. Randy would be much more familiar with that than I am because he works on the front end of this, whereas I do not. However, that determination is key, whatever it is. And if there is no such determination, then the TIF project is done. It's dead in the water. It can't move forward. If a qualifying determination is made that it meets those specific parameters, whatever they are, then the redevelopment plan is prepared. That's done by the developer, and maybe with some assistance from the city as well. It includes project boundaries, the proposed land uses, what types of development will be included in that project. Population studies are a part of that within a certain boundary of the project. Land and building density studies, existing, what's there prior to the project. Any potential zoning changes, traffic studies, and the project duration, whether it be a 15 or now recently that's been allowed to expand to a 20-year program. If all of that meets the approval of the city or the CRA, then the TIF project, pending an approval, a vote of the city council, the project is approved, and then the city or the CRA sends the assessor's office what's known as a notice to divide tax, I should say. That has to be sent to us on before August 1st. Back that up. This changed for 2025. It's now July 1st, where the cities or the CRA have to notify the county of a notice to divide tax for particular projects. And that's our indication. I mean, we can read about it in the paper and we have an idea that something's coming, but until that notice to divide tax arrives on our doorstep, there is no project as far as we're concerned. So once that hits our office, typically what we'll do, we'll read that document and it will say, let's just say it happens this year before July 1. And the developer and the CRA or the city want the division of taxes to begin in 2025, so this year. And typically the way that would work is the base value would be the year prior. So the 2024 values would be the base values that are used for the project. It kind of works, it's a year in arrears. Again, at that point, that's when it comes to our office, and that's the first part we look at. Are those dates, make sure those dates are on there. I know I've spoken to a few of you over the course of the last week and a half, 2 weeks, whatever it is, regarding some concerns about TIF projects here in the county. And I thought you know, naive me, I guess I thought I thought I put all those questions and confusions aside, and maybe not, maybe that's my fault. But, you know, I'm kind of hearing now that there may be some concerns out there that TIF projects are receiving special treatment. I can emphatically deny that that is the case, and we want to dispel any any of those rumors that are out there. TIF properties, from our perspective, from the county assessor's perspective, are treated no differently than any other property in our office, there are a couple of exceptions. The tax dollars paid by those properties are split, for lack of a better word, divided, I guess, is the terminology they use in the TIF literature. It's a division of taxes between the base value and the excess value. That happens behind the scenes in our office. It's taken care of within our computer program. Basically, what we do is we build that TIF project into our system. Joe's TIF project. We build it in. It's got the dates. We set the base values as of whatever date is in the TIF documents. And then we really don't have anything else to do with it. The division of taxes takes place behind the scenes when we calculate taxes annually, every year. We don't have to go in and manually do any of that. The programming takes care of it. So again, we really don't. We know that properties are in a TIF project, but honestly, when we look at them, we don't care, because once we've got that built into the system, it's happening on its own on the annual basis. Previous system, we would see it when you look at the computer screen. You would see a base value, an excess value, and a total value. In essence, 3 values. So it was kind of confusing. And the excess value was the amalgamated total of both the base and the excess. So with our new system, we don't see that anymore. We see one value. It's the total value. We don't see the split between the base and the excess because we don't care. It doesn't make a difference in our valuation of the property. We value the property as it is, regardless of if it's a TIF parcel or a non-TIF parcel. Kind of lost my place here, so excuse me. I guess maybe I'll just give you a little bit of an example, and to make it as clean and quick as possible, I'll use a very simplified example. But let's just say housing development where it's literally just grass, pasture, or whatever when it's put into the development, when it's put into the TIF project. Excuse me. So that base value will more than likely be the value of the land as it were when it was undeveloped, grass, pasture, whatever you want to call it. Just undeveloped land and whatever that value would be, not very much. And then once we determine what that base value is, again, typically we would, if the TIF documentation tells us to, we back up a year to do that. And then we'll just hope and pray that the project is developed in a timely manner. And in this case, let's say they're building houses. So we have this lot that was simply, a grass value beforehand. And now we have a lot a year or 2 years down the road that now has a house on it. So the value of the land that went from a grass value to a lot value, a residential lot value, depends on where you are, what those are going to be value-wise, and then the value of the house or the structure or whatever's built there. Those two components make up the excess value. So typically what you'll see is a very low base value and a higher excess value. That excess value, back up just a little bit. That base value, the taxes on the base value as they're divided, that's what continues to go to the local taxing entities, the levying authorities, for that particular property. So cities, schools, county, NRD, all those entities that might have levying authority. The excess value, the taxes on the excess value are split. That's the other part of the split. And those are the taxes that go to pay down the development bonds. And my terminology may not be exactly right, but those, again, we don't, our computer takes care of that. That goes to the treasurer's office, and the treasurer disperses those funds. The base value funds, the base value taxes go to the local political entities, and the excess value taxes are delivered to the city or the CRA, the Community Redevelopment Authority. And the city or the CRA takes those dollars and distributes them. I'll let Randy speak to that. That's his thing, not mine. Don't want to step on anybody's toes. So that's how that works with the division of taxes. The valuation process is no different than any other real estate parcel. TIF parcels can have homestead exemptions if a qualifying applicant happens to live in a home that is part of the TIF project. They are able to qualify for homestead exemptions if they meet those parameters. Those TIF parcels are also allowed to have, I guess, the real property tax credits that a normal house, and again, a lot of times I refer to these, it's easier to generalize this discussion with regards to a house as opposed to anything else. So they are allowed to have the real property tax credits applied to them as well. That's probably all I got. I'm sorry that was such a butchered presentation, but I really didn't have any time to put much of a thought process into it. I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of TIF, how it comes to us, when it comes to us, the parameters that it would meet before it actually gets to us, what we do with it, which honestly we do with the only thing we do different with the TIF parcel is we set it up when it's given to us. When the notice to divide tax comes to us, we set that up, and we really don't care. We don't touch anything with regards to TIF valuation until we receive the notice of cease to divide taxes is what it's called. And the city or the CRA will send that to us once the project debt has been satisfied, if you will. Other than that, it's treated like any other property. So I guess I'll open myself up to questions.
Jeff, just a quick thing, I appreciate that. One quick question. You talked about the valuation, the base value being set when you receive the notice to divide. So let me give you a hypothetical. So let's say you have a development and it's got 20 lots, and the infrastructure is put in, the roads, the water, sewer, et cetera, and a house is built right away, year one, you get the notice to divide in July, so your base value is probably just the dirt cost.
Typically.
But let's say nothing gets built for another 2 or 3 years, and then another house gets built. By that point in time, I assume those lots are revalued based upon the infrastructure, so then is your base value a true lot value? No, it doesn't.
No, that base value is the base value for the project. And we're seeing a lot of TIF projects that are phase one, phase two, phase three, they're breaking it up into smaller projects, So that when that project, TIF project is established, let's say it's 20 lots. We will establish the base value, again, according to whatever we're told in that notice to divide taxes as far as the dates. And let's say it's the year prior. We will establish the base value. And again, it's much cleaner to describe this as everything being vacant to start with. I mean, you can have TIF projects that have developments or have improvements in them when they start, but it's much cleaner to just use a blank slate. So all of those 20 lots will have a base value of the same year.
So even though that notice to divide is only for 2 lots, because the notice to
Oh,
divide
okay,
is.
well, no, yes, if the notice to divide, that's what we would call a project.
Okay.
Each
Typically
notice
it's
to
by-
divide.
But typically, that notice to divide is by property, so let's say only 2 properties got a house on them. Correct me if I'm wrong, Randy.
Let me expound on what you're getting at, Jim. The base value, according to Jeff, is set the same for each project. And Jeff's looking at a project based on notices to divide. I look at a project as Middleman's Lake, for instance, or Legacy Bend. And what you'll usually see is, let's talk single-family housing, because that's what we're talking about here primarily. If you have vacant land at the time that project starts, and it hasn't been platted, there's no infrastructure on it, that's gonna be dirt cheap. I mean, the value per lot's gonna be very low. Then the developer comes in, he's ready to start his project, and he plats the property. And I've had developers complain to me about, we draw a few lines on a map and my assessed valuation goes up. I can't do nothing about that, they need to complain to Jeff.
They do.
Their assessed valuation will increase then. And then they come in later and they put in the streets, the water, the sewer, and all the other infrastructure. Assessed valuation will go up again then. These single-family developments are almost always phased. And each phase basically relates to a TIF bond. And then within each phase, there are sub-phases. And that's where Jeff is talking about a project, is those sub-phases where we go in and say there's supposed to be 180 houses in this development, but they're going to divide it up into 9 phases, and there's 20 lots per phase. Each one of those phases will probably take 5 or 6 years for the houses to get built on them. So some of these lots will be 6 years out after things have been platted, the infrastructure's been put in, and there'll be lots selling in the meantime. Jeff's computer system will go in there and look at that, I presume, and as those values, lot sales values are going up, you'll get some increase in valuation just based on the similar lots in the area selling. So normally when you go in and divide taxes, and you'll divide those taxes, and the developers tell us when they want to divide those taxes, but we kind of keep an eye on them, make sure they don't get too far off track. Once you've got some valuation on there, ideally, from the developer standpoint, you'd like to get the house constructed all in 1 calendar year. That doesn't happen always. So you may have a developer coming in 2025, getting the house started, it's not completely built out yet, but he will divide those taxes in 2026. Because if he doesn't, say half of the valuation's out there, that's $1 million house, and there's $500,000 of value on that he built in 2025. He's gonna lose that $500,000 in value for the next 15 years if he doesn't divide in 2026. So that effective date will be January 1, 2026. His base value will be the year before that, January 1 of 2025, when it was a vacant lot, but valued a lot more than it was back before the project got going, when it was really just bare dirt. No lines drawn on the map, no infrastructure put in, and no increase in values throughout that time. So that base value for that particular lot will be much higher than it was at the time the project started. Did I say that right, Jeff?
Sure,
That's how
I'm
this-
sure you did.
As I understand this works, and what we normally see is in these single-family developments, the base value is a lot higher than what the valuation would have been before the project started.
So I'm still a little confused because Jeff's saying the base value sounds like it's set for the whole phase upon the first notice of divide and it's bare ground value. But you're talking about value increases and the base value could be higher? I'm
I think
confused.
Jeff and I are saying the same thing.
I
Just
think
saying
so.
the project is the notice to divide. And maybe that 5 lots or 6 lots that we had houses started on this last year, that's, to Jeff, that's a project.
Yeah,
To
to
me,
us,
the
that's a
project.
each notice to divide is a separate project, if you will, from our perspective. And Randy works with so much more of that detail before it ever gets to us. And I don't want to say we don't care what project is what project we get, but again, it's whatever came in on that notice to divide sheet by August 1st or now July 1st. I'm gonna have to memorize a new set of dates.
So Jeff, if the notice was to divide was for the 20 lots in this example, they would have,
Those 20 lots would have the base
A
value.
base valuation.
The same date.
but if they were 2 or 3 of those to divide, those would have a different valuation than the other 8 or 7 or 8.
Right, as they come in, if they're.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Okay, so let me ask that same question. again. So 20 lots, the first 2 lots are built upon right away. You get the notice to divide a year later after they're built, and you go back to base ground value for your base value. The next 2 lots are built a year later, and by that point in time, all the infrastructure's already been in place for a year, so the lot,
They'll have a different lot value, but probably not a different base value if they were a part of that same project.
okay, so the base value you're setting as part of that whole phase.
As of the date of that notice to divide the tax, that's gonna tell us what year they want, the developer in the city or CRA want the division of taxes to begin. And
Because,
typically, if we get one, before July 1 of this year, I hate to put words in anybody's mouth, because as soon as I do, it's gonna wind up being wrong. But, if we were to get one, the typical way that would work is we would receive that before July 1, telling us the developer and the city or CRA want the division of taxes for the 2025 valuation year. So those would be the taxes that we would send out, no, not the taxes, the valuations, the division of taxes, the tax roll we would create for 2025 values. But it would most likely tell us that they want the base value to be the 2024 value, the year prior. That's typically the way it works. And like Randy alluded to, it's because I think a lot of, some development, not a lot, some development can happen fairly quickly. And the developer wants to capture as much, I think the assessor's office is probably the only entity out there that calls it excess value. Most people probably refer to it as incremental value. Randy probably does, developers probably do. Again, that's just the way we were taught years ago, base, excess, total. The developer wants to capture as much of that incremental value as they can, so they try and go back the year prior to ensure that that base value, I guess, if you want to call it that, is as low as it as low as I can get it.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, so again, if you've got 20 lots, and you're gonna build 2 homes per year, so it's a 10-year build-out for those 20 lots, you're gonna get, most likely, if they're building 2 per year, you're gonna get 10 notice of divides for that development, correct?
No. Well, it depends on how it's set up.
What Jim said is right. If it's selling 2 per year for the next 10 years, we'll give Jeff 10 notices.
So he's gonna get 10 notice of
Okay.
divide, but
I see what you're saying
We're
now.
setting the base value on the first notice of divide, is that correct?
Only for whatever's included, that project, that TIF, that notice to divide tax will list all of the legal descriptions that are included in that. And if that's 5 lots, it'll have 5 legal descriptions. And we can read those and we say, okay, that's lot 1, block 2, lot 2, block 2. You know what I mean? Those that are in that notice to divide, if it's 5 lots, those will all have the base value set at the same time. Regardless if a house is built, 2 houses are built this year and 2 houses are built next year, they're all gonna wind up with the same base value. Now, if that happens to be phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, then we'll probably receive another notice to divide, based on 5 additional lots, or, you know, however it's broken up. So whatever that notice to divide says is what we're going to go by for establishing that TIF project, and then it'll have,
And maybe I can make things a little bit clearer. The big changes in valuation you see usually happen early on in the project. You've got the bare dirt value, then you got the value of the bare dirt with lines drawn on a map, then you got the value with the infrastructure in. So those first 2 or 3 years, you may see those lot values stepping up noticeably each year as you go along. After that, once the infrastructure has been platted and the infrastructure's in, you probably won't see a lot of change in those base values. They'll be fairly constant for the next, in your case, 10 years. I would expect them to go up some as house value tends to go up, but they will be relatively stable. As lot values go up.
It seems to me that was what some people were trying to get at. I was unclear when that base value, base dirt value changed to base dirt value plus lines, to base dirt value with lines plus the infrastructure. So there's like 3 or 4 phases, not
Yeah,
phases,
that'll
3 or 4
step-
steps of how
Yeah,
that
normally
valuation
that'll
increases.
Step up fairly quickly in those first few years and then stay fairly constant.
So theoretically, at the end of a 20-house project, the last 2, the lot value, base value of the lot includes the dirt with lines, and the infrastructure, when it's given the notice to divide.
if that's in, yes,
Yeah.
if that's in place at the
Yeah,
notice.
I
of
think
divide.
that's the one that we're all sitting here thinking about.
Okay.
We're not dreaming on this thing. And so then the house gets built. And if it gets done all in the year, in July, from July to December 31st, then that valuation all gets reported in whenever that gets reported.
Right,
Probably isn't gonna get done in 6 months, so you're gonna have a couple of years for that full value of the house to get added onto that lot.
right.
Okay, thanks.
And, you know, I'm not a developer, obviously, I'm not familiar with everything that happens on the development end and what, you know. But again, like I said, we do see developers, and rightfully so, I think, you know, from their perspective, wanting to capture as much of that incremental value as they can to quote-unquote fund the debt, you know, to pay down the debt, the indebtedness that comes along with the development of the infrastructure for that project.
Jeff, once a project's completed, so you have a completed house, what's the process for, do they have to turn in incidental or any info? How do you set the valuation, or how long does it take before the valuation is probably where it's all the way through that
Well,
process?
I mean, that's a hard question to answer. I mean, there's too many variables involved there, but, we don't receive anything from the city or the CRAs once the project has been, once we receive the notice to divide the tax. We don't receive anything from the developer. In fact, we don't typically receive anything from the developer ever, because the notice to divide comes through the city or the CRA. And then, I guess barring anything catastrophic, we won't see anything again on a TIF project until such time as the city or the CRA notifies us through that ceased to divide taxes notice comes to us, that basically that's telling us the project, the TIF bonds have been satisfied. Bonds, is that the right word to use? TIF bonds have been satisfied, and then the project is complete, and it's no longer a TIF project. We pull out the programming, if you will, behind the scenes, so that division of taxes no longer happens. When we distribute the tax roll to the treasurer's office, the treasurer gets it, and don't want to get too much into the weeds on how that works, because I don't understand how it works on that end. But then the treasurer will take those taxes, the 100%, the total value taxes, and distribute that to the political entities that have levying authority for that property.
So in summary, you're during the house is built, there's the 15-year TIF period or whatever. You still appraise those. They still
Absolutely.
continue to go up throughout that 15-year
Absolutely.
process, just like any other property.
Up or down, I mean, it depends on the market. I mean, the
And-
market's been nothing but up lately.
But is it safe to say there can be delays sometimes in catching up to the valuations after a project is done?
I would not say delays. What I would say is we simply don't have the resources, either, fiscal or labor, to do every house every year. We do those properties when we can see that they are out of compliance, or when they happen to come into our schedule to do. So there can be years where the valuation doesn't change. Yeah.
Doesn't have anything to do with TIF, non-TIF,
Absolutely
that's the
not.
same process for
Again,
everything.
once we set that up, we really don't, looking at a property on our computer screen, on any of that, you can't tell it's a TIF, because all that takes place behind the scenes. And again, it really, once we get that set up, the division of taxes, I guess we do the math. The computer will do the math to establish this is the base value, this is the excess value, these are the tax dollars attributable to the base value, these are the tax dollars attributable to the excess value. And aside from that, I hate to use the term, we don't care, but it's a non-issue for us. If that explains, yes, sir.
Yeah, May 20th, Candace Alder sent us all an email. There's 4 attachments, and one of them listed a lot of TIF projects here in Norfolk. And I picked out 3 of them. I went into them a little bit deeper, and 2 of them I picked out was Legacy Bend and the Bradford Business Park on South 37th.
Okay.
And through the years, which for Bradford Business Park wasn't very long,
No.
but those businesses out there have, the appraisal value of those businesses did increase. The third project I looked at, 6 of those houses out there, one did not increase the valuation at all in 3 years. The other one was 5 years, did not increase. The other ones were 4 years, did not increase. I mean, they just stayed the same. The others in that project, all, the appraisal value went up. And I couldn't figure that out.
And I can't answer that right here. I mean, I can absolutely take a look at it. But again, it has, for whatever reason that would happen to be, it certainly has nothing to do with the fact that it may or may not be in a TIF project. Again, we don't have our TIF projects separated, if for lack of a better word, in our system or in our methodologies. In fact, with something that's new-ish, micro TIF, which is within the last few years, and that is TIF on a single project, typically a house, may even be restricted to houses, is it? The micro
No,
TIF?
I mean, the Kensington, for instance, could have used micro-TIF because it was on the historical registry, even though that project would have been a big micro-TIF project, been a pretty good size regular TIF project.
I think where we're probably going to see the most micro TIF is with single residential properties. And I'm not that familiar with it, but I think it's got a maximum of $350,000 on that property, if I'm not mistaken. Again, that's where it's going to be. You're gonna have one house sitting right next to another house. One may very well be TIF'd and the other one may not. They may look exactly the same. I presume the one that did get TIF financing is probably going to be renovated in some manner. I mean, what else are they gonna do with the TIF funds? So you're probably gonna have one that gets remodeled versus the one that may not right next door. But again, we're not gonna look at that house any differently because it's a TIF parcel, other than we may look at it differently because we're gonna get a building permit that says, I'm just pulling the straws here. We put in a new kitchen, we finished the basement, we put on an addition, whatever that TIF funding is intended to be used for. So there you're gonna see us going out and addressing that property differently than the one next to it because something has happened. But that's no different than if both properties were not in TIF and one person put an addition onto the house or finished the basement or something along those lines. So again, the TIF really doesn't have any bearing in what we do aside from the division of taxes at the beginning of the project and throughout the life of the project, obviously. And then the notice to cease division at the end is really the only times we ever pay any heedance to the fact that that it is in a TIF parcel, TIF project.
One more quick question. So there's a development in town that has some very expensive homes in it, and those homes, from what I've seen, have not increased in 4 or 5 years in value. And yet virtually every other home in town has increased in value on a regular basis. Can you explain that?
I can. Because I hate to assume anything, but I believe I know what you're talking about. Those homes, that area has not popped up on our radar, if you will, because there are no real sales out there that say, oh, you're way low or you're way high. So it's falling into our schedule of doing reappraisal work. The valuations there are changing for this year, for 2025, and they're scheduled to be reappraised next year for 2026. So will there be valuation change 2 years in a row? Possibly. I don't want to project what might happen in the future, but I can tell you the valuations are changing this year. Again, just as a matter of our having gone through that area.
So then when every other home in town, most of them in developments go up, stair step up every year, what makes those go up every year, just as a regular, I mean, you're not looking at those every year, they're just going up, I would assume, because you're.
Well, yes, and I would say that there aren't many comparable properties to the ones that you're talking about. We don't have a lot of those types of houses that sell with comparable locational amenities. Yeah.
How do you value the home when it's first built? The incremental valuation, how do you get that?
Sometimes that's very tough because a lot of times we do not receive a set of plans for a house. Ideally, in the perfect world, when we're doing our review and we leave door hangers and if that doesn't work, we call. If that doesn't work, we send a letter asking for permission to review the property, to list the property, if you will. Get all the amenities that are part of that house. Again, let's use a house. It's an easier example. Many times we do not receive much of anything. So we've got the measurements where we strung a tape around the outside. Some of them are two-story houses, multiple-story houses. Some of them may or may not have basements. Basements are fairly easy to tell if it has a basement or not, or if it's on a slab. If it's on a basement or a crawl, sometimes not so easy. Two-story, it's tough. It's tough to tell if that's a 100% two-story house or if it's a, I don't want to say false walls because the walls are there, but there's no floor behind a portion of that. It's just open 2 stories. If we don't have a set of plans and we haven't been allowed in those houses, then we're left with no option but to guess. I hate to use that word, but we just estimate based on what information we are able to gather. So in the perfect world, we do not receive floor plans on very many houses at all. And that's unfortunate.
Does the correction then tend to happen as a property would sell in that said neighborhood? And then you kind of have more of a baseline, or?
Well, as a property sells, no, we're not going to know if it's got a finished basement. We're not going to know if it's a full 2-story. I mean, we're not going to pick that up just on a sale. I mean, the sale may have sold for $150,000 one year and $195,000 2 years later, but that doesn't tell us that any of the attributes, it doesn't give us any indication of the attributes of the house. And honestly, that's I don't know if that's the question you were really trying to get at, but that's our biggest struggle, is to get accurate information. That is, there's 93 assessors in this state. If you ask 93 of them, I think everyone will tell you getting accurate information on properties is the largest struggle.
And there's no legislation that says developers, you have to give this, okay.
No. That would be very helpful, but no.
A quick question, and maybe Val can answer. Would we have plans that could be conveyed to the county? Is that not something we've ever done before, I would assume?
So residential in particular, we don't get a lot of detail on home plans. What we do turn over to the county is our building permit that says it is so many square feet of the house, so many square feet of the garage, so they do have the square footage of what is getting built. But we don't get plumbing plans, electrical plans. I mean, we pretty much get a basic shell for the most part for residential. We get a lot more for commercial and industrial, obviously, because it's much bigger and expansive. But like I said, plumbers, electricians, we don't get an electrical plan like you're building the soybean plant or something like that. They just kind of build it as it comes through. But the county does get square footages of what is built.
And can I ask? Mm-hmm. When you get that application for a building permit and it says, I'm not even gonna fake an address because there'll be somebody's address. X house, the building permit comes in and it's 1,200 square feet with 600 square feet of garage. Is somebody giving you something so that you know that's 1,200 and 600, or is that just, I'm writing 1,200 and 600 and?
Yes and no sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes we truly get a hand-drawn plan, particularly additions and things like that, because we have a piece of grid paper, and they will say, here's the square of the existing house, here's the square of the addition, here are our setbacks, there's my plan. So it depends, we can get something as simple as that, or we could get something potentially a little more complicated, but yeah.
Yeah, and you're seeing a lot, the old, 20-foot by 40-foot rectangle house, 800 square feet with the 14 by 20-foot garage beside it. Those, not a whole lot of guesswork there. Now you've got houses that are built on angles, and it's difficult to tell what is garage space versus what is living space on many of the newer builds, because so many of them are not simple squares or rectangles. They're jogged walls and all this. So yeah, we do, unfortunately. I wish our data was better. I wish the data we received, information we received, was better. So.
Can I ask Val a follow-up question to that? When you get if I get a building permit, that building permit is not, the fee for that is not based on what I'm building, is that correct? I mean, it's based not on what the cost is of what I'm building.
Correct, yeah.
It's based on square footage?
Yes, the building permit is based on square footage, and it depends on, is it first floor and above? Is there a basement calculation? Is it a detached accessory? Is it a garage? So, yeah.
And if you get a building permit, does it have, as you talk about the problems that Jeff's got, it does or does not have anything on it that indicates this is how much this is gonna cost me, this addition or this structure or whatever?
Yes, that is how we get our valuation that we put in, because on the building permit, we do ask, what is the contractor going to charge? Is it $100,000? Is the plumber gonna charge 20? Is the electrician gonna charge 20? And so when you look at our building permit reports that I do the second meeting of every month at Planning Commission that's attached to that agenda packet, you'll see an estimated valuation for what has come through. And that valuation potentially has nothing to do with yours. It's what the developer is telling us is going to cost them to essentially build that. So you could potentially have a 1,000 square foot house, two of them being built. One is very fancy and they're gonna spend $300,000 to build it. Another one is $100,000 to build it. But the permit cost is going to be the same for us because they're both 1,000 square foot houses, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
One more quick question. I know previously there was some discussion that protesting property valuations, that potentially one person could protest somebody else's property valuation. I see the city gave us something today that says that's not true, but I thought you told Clint or somebody that was true, that any citizen can protest another citizen's property.
As far as I'm aware,
Okay, all right, thank you.
can.
To that end, Jim, the statute itself contemplates if the protest is filed by somebody other than the owner or their authorized agent. So I think the response that the city provided in here from bond counsel is just clearly wrong.
So, as I understand it, that is the case, that anybody can protest any valuation out there. Just, I will say that I think there's some language in there somewhere, and again, I'm not an attorney, that because all these protests are filed with the clerk's office, the county clerk, that the county clerk then has the obligation to notify the property owner, I won't say homeowner, property owner, that X person is protesting their value. They have to be notified and they are a party to the.
exact language, Jeff, is that if the protest is filed some other than by the owner or by an agent, then notice has to be given. So
Because they're a party
the
to.
clerk doesn't need to give notice if I'm the owner and I filed the protest. But if Steve filed the protest on my property, then I don't know about it until the clerk tells me, so that makes sense.
Right, because you're a party to the process. Of course, Clint's got the language right there in front of him. He can make me look like I don't know.
No,
what
I'm just
talking
saying you're right. I agree with you.
If there's nothing else, I really do kind of have to get on the road. Is there anything else quickly?
Nope, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff, and we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, number 6, and that is the review of the financial process and money flow of a redevelopment agreement, explanation of the issuing of the bonds, notice of divide, property tax collections, payments to the developer, and any other pertinent information to understand the financial progress of a TIF redevelopment project. Number 6 and number 7 might kind of go together. We're going to have Randy talk about this. Number 7 is reviewing the city back-end financial information of TIF, the documentation required for bond issuance, bond documents, spot documentation, notice of divide documentation, reimbursement request documentation, and document retention requirements. And I'll let Randy decide whether he wants to combine those or talk about them individually.
There's a lot of overlap in those two. I tried to put in the PowerPoint a break point on those, but there's so much overlap that probably should talk about them together. I attempted to do that, but probably without a lot of success. First, I was going to talk about TIF project cash flow. TIF bond issuance can bring dollars into the project up front. One of the ways it can do that is if there's an outside party that actually buys those TIF bonds. That doesn't happen very often. Normally, it's the redeveloper that owns those bonds. I believe that's happened twice that I can recall. In one case, the developer had a relationship with 3 banks in the area, and those banks actually bought the TIF bonds, did not just loan money and take the TIF bonds as collateral, which is what often happens. So that put real money into the project. In another case, the corporation that was doing the development had a number of retired officers that had money to invest, and they invested their money in the TIF bonds. So that brought real money into the project. But normally, that doesn't happen.
Okay, Randy, my ears are weak. If you could just maybe pull the mic closer to you if possible.
Your ears are weak and my voice is weak, so that's probably
Perfect,
a
thanks.
bad combination. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Jim. I love it when I have a microphone. I just need to get a bit closer to it. So anyway, I'll just briefly repeat what I said before when you couldn't hear me. Occasionally, we get somebody buying the TIF bonds, but that's rare. When that does happen, you get some real money into the project by the TIF bonds being issued. In most cases, the redeveloper owns the TIF bonds, and the way that he uses those bonds to get money into the project up front to do the project is by pledging that to a bank who loans him the money. And sometimes the bank wants that up front to secure a construction loan. In those cases, we'll issue the TIF bond up front for the costs that we've got that are documented to us that are TIF eligible. Those are usually things like site acquisition cost. There'll be legal, engineering, and architecture costs that are probably incurred up front. Those kind of things, and sometimes those can be fairly substantial. Sometimes they've gone in and done some site prep and that kind of thing. That will be the initial amount of that bond. And then the developer can certify cost as the project goes along, and those costs will be added to the bond. Those are what we call a draw bond. I don't like them because they're a lot of work. I don't think the developers really like them because they're a lot of work to the developer. Sometimes you get arguing back and forth, is this TIF eligible or this not TIF eligible? But if they need that bond to secure financing, we will do that. And they will pledge that to the bank, and in most cases, the bank wants the TIF bond payments going directly to the bank. Occasionally, you'll see it where the pledge documents will say, as long as this TIF bond's kept current, the TIF bond payments can go to the bondholder, which is a developer. But that's not the normal way that works. Normally, the TIF bond payments go directly to the bank. What often happens, and I'd probably say this is the most common, although there are a lot of projects where the TIF bond ends up getting pledged to the bank, but probably more often than not, the redeveloper holds the bond himself. And he finds some other way to finance the project. Maybe he has his own money he puts into it. Maybe he's borrowing money, but the bank isn't requiring the TIF bond as security. But whatever way he's doing it, the TIF bond is not directly putting money into that project up front to do it. The redeveloper gets reimbursed for his TIF eligible cost over the next 15 years or so, maybe longer on a phase project, maybe less if the bond pays off early. But he gets reimbursed over the life of the bond. And his principal is paid back. That's reimbursing him for his TIF eligible costs he incurred on the front end of the project. Basically, the unpaid principal equals the unreimbursed TIF eligible cost, and he's getting interest on that unreimbursed TIF eligible cost. That's probably the most common way, most common thing that happens on TIF bond issuance is the redeveloper holds bonds. I haven't actually went back through there and counted up our TIF projects to see which is the most common, but I'm thinking that's probably it.
So I'll interrupt you real quick just to ask a question. So in that case, the redeveloper, he earns the interest on the bond which he holds himself.
Yes,
Okay, so basically he's collecting the property taxes that are used to pay the interest to himself.
yes.
Okay,
He's incurred TIF eligible costs at the start of the project. He's getting reimbursed for those TIF eligible costs over the life of that bond. And so his unreimbursed TIF eligible costs, which is basically the unpaid principal amount of the bond, he's earning interest on. And what TIF costs are eligible? There's some costs that can be paid prior to redevelopment project approval, and these are listed in statutes. The biggest one of that's probably land acquisition and related activities. Site demo and preparation is also a big one. And then you've got all your other legal and architectural and engineering type costs that the redevelopers need to incur to put a plan together, that type of thing. Those costs per statutes they can incur before a project's been approved. On the next slide, I've got the other TIF eligible cost. These cannot get paid for with TIF if they're incurred before the project's approved. The big one of those that you hear people talk about all the time is infrastructure, your water, sewer, storm sewer, streets, sidewalks, electrical. Also, if you're in an area like downtown where you've got a lot of old buildings, most of the TIF projects you see downtown are primarily rehab. And that's probably what people think of traditionally as being redevelopment project. You're going in and you're taking an old building and you're developing that into a new, more functional building. You see downtown street furniture and that kind of thing. You can see it in other places. That's TIF eligible, your benches and trash bins and that kind of stuff. We've never done a workforce housing project, but that is also a TIF eligible cost, and you can pay for new construction on a workforce housing project. That's about the only thing you can pay for new construction on with TIF is workforce housing. What you see in these kind of developments, we were talking back and forth about when we were talking with Jeff, where you're going in and you're taking dirt that's basically bare dirt, and you got to put all the infrastructure in and those kind of things. You'll usually see those kind of TIF eligible costs, site acquisition, infrastructure, site prep, all these other ancillary costs eating up all or most of what your incremental valuation will support. So unless you have an area that's really already prepped and ready to go with infrastructure, there's normally not lots of bonding capacity left for construction cost, but that is a TIF eligible cost. We've not done one yet.
Did you say we've not done a workforce housing one yet?
No.
Okay.
Then you got these bonds issued, you got to get them paid back, and how does that work? Well, they're tax increment financing, so you'd expect that to be paid from the incremental taxes, and that is how the bond is paid off. The property owner is kind of like Jeff. He doesn't doesn't really care how much of that is incremental taxes, how much of it is base taxes, unless he also happens to be the bondholder. He's paying the same amount of taxes they would pay whether that was in a TIF project or not. But that's divided up. And taxes on the base value go to the normal taxing entities. School being the big one, county, city, and then on down the line. Normally, and this is kind of what Jeff was saying early on, the base value is thought of as the valuation before the TIF project got started. That's sometimes the case, but a lot of times it isn't. As we talked about, in single-family housing projects, you'll oftentimes see that base value be much higher than that bare dirt value, because that bare dirt value may just be a $3,000 or $4,000 per lot, where they take the value of that whole parcel and divide it up. You get that thing platted, you get the infrastructure in, that value is going to go way up. So, and the base value can also go down too. Say you've got a project that has structures on it that may have some significant assessed valuation, but the developer doesn't want them. They're a liability to him. He's got to get rid of them. When he goes in there and clears that property and demos those old buildings out of there, that's made to him, that property, a better property. But those old buildings may have had some significant assessed value on them, so that improvement value goes away. So the the value can stay the same, which sometimes happens if the property develops quickly. It can go up, and sometimes very significantly go up, or it can go down, sometimes very significantly go down. So the idea that the base value is the pre-project value is what people think of. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. But it's the value, this is defined in statutes, it's the value of the year before the effective date of the, what Jeff refers to as a project, what I typically refer to as a phase or a sub-phase, or if you got a property that's just done in one phase, the year you go in and divide the taxes, January 1 of that year is the effective date, and that's when you're going to start getting the incremental valuation, and by state law, the base value is the value the year before the effective date. So we talked a lot about that. I probably repeat myself needlessly, but that is not necessarily the value, pre-project value.
So just to confirm, so the base value is set by the assessor at the time that he receives the notice to divide, and that's the valuation of the property the year prior?
Yeah, so that valuation would have been set before he knew when that property was going to get divided, maybe before I knew when it was going to get divided, maybe before the developer knew, because particularly in single-family housing, you're not sure when you're going to get those lots sold and when construction's going to start.
So it's not captured when the redevelopment contract is finalized, it's not captured until the actual notice of divide?
Yes.
Thank you.
And then taxes on that incremental valuation, the valuation as it exists today, and the valuation that's the value the year before it was divided, that incremental valuation, which you'd probably expect to see increase gradually over the life of the bond, that is what the incremental taxes are based on, and those incremental taxes are the debt service on the TIF bond. And that's how that TIF bond gets paid off, or possibly not paid off if something happens where the project doesn't go like was anticipated, or for some reason tax rates would go down. It's possible that bond may not get paid off. We have not had that happen yet. We've had all of our TIF bonds paid off, but it does happen. Then how do those real estate taxes flow on TIF project? Taxes on base value go to everybody that would normally get those taxes. Taxes on the incremental value go to the Community Development Agency. Jeff was referring to a CRA, or a Community Revitalization Authority. We happen to have a Community Development Agency, or CDA. There's more CRAs out there than CDAs, but there's a lot of CDAs out there too. The Community Development Agency pays all that incremental taxes. We'd round them down to the nearest $100 to the bondholder on the bond payment dates. There'll be a bond payment date twice a year, 6 months apart, as is pretty much standard with municipal bonds. The bond owner is the property owner. And for instance, in multifamily housing, that's normally the case. The developer owns the property. He also owns the bond. They're one and the same. If the TIF bond isn't pledged, those taxes make a little circle going from the redeveloper as the property owner to the county. The county keeps 1% of that, sends it to the agency. The agency on the next debt service date for that bond will pay that to the bondholder. That can take anywhere from 2 to 7 months, depending on what the due date is on the bonds and when those payments are made and how quickly the county processes them. But it's a little circle. It takes anywhere from as little as 2 months to 7 months, maybe
What
could
do
take
you,
a
what do you
little bit longer.
typically see that time to be, that circle?
Those, we try to set those payment dates to get the money to the redeveloper as quickly as possible. It's good for the redeveloper, pays off the TIF bonds earlier, good for everybody. Even in the case of multifamily housing or commercial development where the developer is the property owner, you'll oftentimes see them misjudge, at least when we're doing the maturity dates of those bonds, which set the payment dates, misjudge that, and so say you've got a June 1 payment date. The taxes get paid in April. The county will pay them to us in May, and we'll have those taxes on June 1 in time to make that June 1 payment. But if he waits and pays them on the due date, we won't get those taxes until June, and we would not have those taxes on the June 1 payment date. And then you've got the back end of the thing where 6 months later, which would be December 1, he's making his tax payments that become delinquent September 1. And so if you move those up or back a little bit, it tends to be good for him on the back end or good for him on the front end, but it's hard to be good for him on both ends. So I'm guessing the average time would be somewhat in the middle of that, maybe 3 or 4 months, but I've never actually sat down and figured that out. And so if the bondholder and the property owner run the same, they would probably like their valuations to be as low as possible because they're without their money for a few months and the county's taking a percent of it before they get it back. So that little circle takes some time, at least 2 months. And they know they're going to lose a percent to the county. On the other hand, if the bond owner and the property owner are different, which you almost always see on single-family residential development, the advantage to the developer and to his bank would be to have those valuations as high as possible. Because he's not paying those taxes. He's just getting that money back as a payment on his bonds. So he's got an incentive to have had bondholders call me up fairly frequently wondering why their payment isn't as high as it should be. And I've had their banks call me up fairly often wondering why their payment isn't high as they thought it should be. I haven't gone in and looked at the assessed valuation, but what is normally happening is a timing difference. Those taxes aren't getting paid to us as quick as they thought they would. So that I know they look at it. I haven't had them complain about assessed values, but I have had them complain about the timing of those bond payments. Talk a little bit about, and we've talked about it quite a little bit already, about how a phased TIF project works. And the classic example is what we've already been talking about, single-family housing.
Can you pull that mic up closer to you again?
The classic example of that phased TIF project is single-family housing. Those are almost always done as a phased TIF project. The developer will come in and put in so much infrastructure, whatever he thinks is a good way for him to construct the project, and won't be getting a lot of dollars in the ground before he has a chance to recover them from the sale of those lots. So those are almost always phased projects, and a phase to us at the city means a TIF bond issue. developer will come in, put in the infrastructure for phase one. We will issue a TIF bond for those infrastructure costs and the other TIF costs. And within that phase one, we will have sub-phases. Because in the example you were just using, 20 houses, those 20 houses are not going to sell, or those 20 lots aren't all going to sell and get developed on in 1 year. That's going to be strung out. Normally what I see developers figuring, but it varies from developer to developer and development to development, is, okay, we're going to sell 4 lots a year, 5 lots a year, 6 lots a year. So in the case of a 20 lot phase, that's probably going to be somewhere around 5 sub-phases, we would think. And as each one of those lots gets built on, the developer will come in and say, I want to divide taxes for that lot this year. And he'll probably do that even if he's thinking that's going to be $1 million house and he's only got a couple $100,000 of improvement value January 1, because if he doesn't, then that couple $100,000 in this example is in his base value. He loses his incremental value for the next 15 years. So as the developer tells us, and the redevelopment agreements all say, the redeveloper's got to tell us what they want to divide. The onus is on them. But like I mentioned earlier, we try to look over their shoulder and see if we think they're doing it right. If we don't think they're doing it right, we'll let them know and say, you sure you want to divide this year? Or this one had a increase in assessed valuation this year, or do you want to divide that? So we're trying to get the developers to divide those taxes when we think they should, but it's their call. And if that call gets made wrong, that's their problem. The redevelopment contract puts all the onus on them. The best way for the developer would be he starts the house and he finishes the house all in the same calendar year. A lot of times that doesn't happen. He'll start the house, he'll have partial valuation on January 1 of the year that he wants to divide. So in that particular year, he's not going to get a full increment of taxes. So even though that sub-phase says he gets taxes, the incremental taxes for 15 years, the first year of that 15 years will be small, be short what it normally would be. So in effect, he's getting incremental taxes for 15 years, but the value that first year could be pretty darn low or pretty close to the full value, but maybe getting 14 and a half years worth of taxes and not the full 15 if he can. Some developers are better at that than others are trying to get their houses all built in the calendar year, but oftentimes that doesn't happen. So they, a lot of times, will not get a full 15 years of incremental value. They can't collect more than 15 years. Well, for this whole presentation, I'm assuming it's not extremely blighted and substandard. So they can't collect more than 15 years on any given parcel. But there can be parcels in that phase that are 5, 6 years apart. So they may continue to collect taxes, incremental taxes on that particular phase for 20 years, 22, 23 years. We don't let these projects go on forever. We don't want them sitting out there and not developing. So there's always a maturity date in that bond. And that bond usually looks at, okay, if this development goes like we think it's going to go, maybe 20 years out, this thing will be paid off. We'll collect all the incremental taxes and we'll add some years to that. Maybe instead of 20 years, we'll have that bond mature 25 years out. because during that period of time, there's probably gonna be times when houses or lots aren't selling fast, and things will move a little bit slow. So to allow some time for those fluctuations, we add some time on the end. But we don't want it just sitting there forever. So there'll be a drop dead date on these things.
Let me jump in there, Randy. So on a phased project, you got phase one of 7 phases, and phase one has 20 lots, and you're building 4 lots per year. So you're doing the notice of divide 5 times for that 20 lot phase one. So the last homes are built year 5, and so that's, bond is probably completed in year 20. So basically, that TIF project goes on for 20 years. Let's say you've got a bigger phase and it's a 50-lot project, and they're still only building 5 years, so it goes out to 10 years before they get them all built. So that's a 25-year TIF project. So the TIF payout goes for that 25 years. It ends in 15-year increments as you do the notice of divide, but it still is in effect for that 25 years.
That's correct.
And you say you have some of those bonds that are 30 years that you have a drop dead date on some of your existing projects. Is that fair?
I believe so. I'd have to go back and look. Normally, these things are constructed. What I've usually seen is these guys are looking at what they think they can sell in about 5 years. But sometimes it doesn't work out that way to put in the infrastructure. They need to go a little farther to loop it in or something. So you may have some that are longer than that. I'm guessing we probably do have some that are out there. Like you said, I don't know that for sure.
So if you have a 7-phase project, a really big development, and you're issuing those bonds at the start of each phase, so that bond end date, that drop dead date on that bond varies by phase. So you could have a TIF project that lasts 50 years potentially.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Randy, so on that drop dead date on that bond, so if that's 30 years, for instance, and if the development is 16 years in and they build a property, they're only going to draw 14, they only have the ability to draw 14 years without some type of amendment. Is that correct? So in essence, you back the drop dead date up 15 years, and that's kind of really when everything's kind of really has to be completed. Is that fair to say that?
Not completely sure I understood your question, but if there won't be more than 15 years of incremental taxes collected on any lot. If the thing develops quicker than we think it will probably pay off quicker than we think it will. And even though that bond may have a maturity date 30 years out, it's possible it may pay off in 16 years. That thing would develop
I guess
really
what I
fast.
was saying is there's an incentive for the developers to get moving with projects, because to experience that full 15 years worth of benefit, it really needs to be started, the last project needs to be started 15 years prior to the drop dead date on the bond.
Yes, I think that what you said is right, if I understood it right. And with or without TIF, time is money. These guys want to get in there and they want to get their lots sold as quick as they can, because they've got all their upfront cost in it, their acquisition cost, whatever they put in that thing for infrastructure. That's sitting there, they're paying interest on it. They're paying to maintain those unsold lots. They're paying insurance on those unsold lots. And they all will tell you, and I believe that's right, because if you look at their pro formas, if they go out, the longer out they go, the tougher it is for them to make money on it. So TIF project or not TIF project, they want to get these things built and sold.
And yet we see some that sit out there for a very long time.
Yes, and I don't think that's because they want them to sit out there for a very long time, but they just haven't been able to sell them.
Is it lack of being able to sell because other builders are building and selling but maybe some aren't? Is that, I don't want to pass specific judgment, but it seems like it varies by builder.
Yes, and I don't know particularly why some of those take longer to sell than others, but I don't know of any reason why they would deliberately want those things to extend on out.
I guess the frustration from a community standpoint is when the city extends TIF to a development and then it doesn't happen, and then the city we're not getting the houses that we hope to get, and then we offer TIF to another development to try and get those houses. Then we've got multiple projects sitting out there, TIF, that we're not going to get property taxes on for multiple projects when we're just trying to get a certain number of houses. It seems like it convolutes what the community is trying to accomplish.
But those unsold lots, well, I'll take that back. One of these developments has a couple houses on it that got built, haven't been able to be sold, and are being rented out. Those are paying incremental taxes. But most of those lots haven't been built on, and they're sitting there, and there's no incremental taxes going for those. And if they don't get going fairly quickly, they will run into that drop dead date on the TIF bonds.
Randy, would it be possible, I mean, if that happens, it's a bad thing for the developer and for...
For the developer, I don't think it's a bad thing for the city.
But if you run up against that date, can you amend those to extend it?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether you can or not.
My guess would be yes, but I could easily be wrong.
I don't know the answer to that. We haven't ever got that far out yet.
I guess where I was going is we could have TIFed projects for 1,000 single-family homes, and yet our housing study says we need 200. And I'm using wild hypothetical numbers, but I mean, if you TIF a project and it's going to produce 175 single-family homes and you get 20, and then it stops, and then you go TIF another project and you're hoping for another 100 homes, and you hope you get 100 homes and not 20, and it stops, because all of a sudden you've got all these TIF projects that are hanging out there that aren't actually producing. And I think it's to the city's, my opinion, to the city's benefit to put some stipulations in those agreements to make sure that they perform the way everybody anticipates they're going to perform.
I don't think those developers are wanting those lots not to sell and not to be developed. If you get the developers to agree to it, you can put those kinds of provisions in the redevelopment contract. There's a lot of risk to these developments. You may or may not get them to sign off on something like that. But having undeveloped lots available, I don't think hurts the city. If we get a new industry in or something where we need a lot of housing, we've got lots developed that are out there and ready to go. In the meantime, you've got lots developed that are paying much more in taxes than they would have as that bare dirt that hasn't been platted, that hasn't had the infrastructure in, and the developers don't like that. We would like to see them sell, but I don't. Developers would really like to see them sell, I would think, but I don't think that hurts the city.
Randy, doesn't that depend on what's happened if there were developments? I don't know what you're doing for the infrastructure. Are you putting out, who's paid for the streets, who's paid for the water, who's paid for the sewer? If those are all special assessments, and I don't know how much of those you'll specially assess, but if those are all special assessments, and they're not able to sell the lots, and you've got those out there, you're gonna be in a position where the city has spent the money for it. The city is going to be in a position to decide whether they need to foreclose on those or do whatever, so.
That's correct. There's risk involved in that.
And I don't know what the current policy is. How much of those improvements is the city participating in? Or putting them all into districts, or is there some of that has to be paid with outside?
We've done one development where we assessed the same infrastructure we did the TIF for, and that was Legacy Bend. We did a lot of negotiations on that project. They at first had wanted us to place the TIF. We didn't do that. At that time, we needed a lot of housing and a lot of pressure to construct housing. We agreed to do special assessments in TIF. I believe that's only been done in the single-family portion of Legacy Bend. And this is all in the redevelopment agreements. But the developer agreed to keep those lots current, and as almost always happens when they sell, the assessments get paid off. And that's what's been happening out there in Legacy Bend. They've been keeping the assessments current. And when the lots sell, like they do every other place, the assessments are getting paid off. You're right, we have risk. If that never gets sold, all those vacant lots out there, and they decide to walk away from them, there's some risk involved. But we knew that when we did the project, and so far, they've been doing what they said they were going to. We only did those assessments for 10 years. And we don't have a whole lot longer on those to go before they will be paid off. So yeah, there's risk.
What's the risk from the city's perspective to the builder? The builder has risk as well doing TIF projects. So in the event, let's say the development we've been talking about, if they utilize TIF money, and the project is unsuccessful, what's the risk, or what happens to the builder? What happens to the money that was done? What can you
If
explain
it's
that?
just TIF and not special assessments, which is been our policy, except for that exception we made for Legacy Bend, the city, if that project goes belly up, the city's not losing anything. Those TIP bonds don't have a general obligation of the city. They don't have a general obligation of the agency. They are only payable from the incremental taxes. So if the incremental taxes don't come in, those bonds could end up not being paid. But that's the bondholder's problem.
Yeah, so if the developer puts money into the project, he may not get, if the project isn't complete or whatever, he might not recoup his
Correct.
money.
A lot of these projects have a significant amount of risk. And in the case of Legacy Bend, there was give and take back and forth, and we came to an agreement that isn't risk-free for the city, but to incentivize the developer to do those projects, the city was willing to take that risk. And I'm guessing we've got enough of those specials paid off now. If for some reason the developer would quit paying those, we're gonna come out okay. But to Glenn's point, yes, there's risk in those where, to the city, if you're gonna do special assessments and TIF. But if it's just TIF, like you were talking about, Troy, I don't see where the city, if a project goes belly up, if it's single family and you've got the developed lots out there, you've been earning extra taxes on those over and above what it would have been as elm platted land without infrastructure. The person that's really taking the financial hit on that's the developer.
It seems to me that maybe the general aggravation here about this Legacy Bend project is it's just stopped. It doesn't appear to be moving at all, and we don't, I think the fear is another black eye in that, like that, if we want to call it a black eye. Randy's told us the city has some risk on this because of the special assessments. The TIF bonds don't have any risk to the city. He's said that several times. I think others have too. So kind of seems like we're talking about a specific project, and I didn't really think that was the goal of this committee, to talk about specific projects. Now, do we want to avoid another project having a similar outcome? Yes, I think we need to work towards that. And if there are ways in the redevelopment agreement to insulate ourselves from it happening, I'm all for that. But I think we're going backwards and saying, well, not what ifs, but we're kind of re-underwriting this whole process that was done several years ago on Legacy Bend. So it's just my thoughts.
I would disagree with that. I think it's important. Can I finish? Can I finish speaking?
Absolutely.
I think it's important for us to learn from those situations. I think it's important for us to understand what went wrong. It's hard for us to put parameters to try and improve things in the future if we don't look at what failed in the past. I mean, it's impossible to try and guess without looking at what our situations were in the past. That's a very important part of this committee, and I think it's important that we do that. The other thing that I'm going to mention in terms of those projects and not getting the outcome that was planned, I mean, if the city is going to give up property taxes, the city, the school, the county, the NRD, the airport, if we're going to give up our property taxes for 15 years because we say it's so important for us as a community to get those homes, we're giving up those tax dollars, and then we don't get them. We don't get the homes. We don't get them in the time frame that we expected to get them. And then we go out and TIF another project to try and get those homes. What have we created? We've created a situation where we have TIF'd a development to try and get the homes. We don't get them, and now we're TIFing in another development to get them. There are other communities, and I'm going to use Columbus as an example. They've got a project called Vitality Village, and they have covenants within that development that says you've got to build and you've got to complete within a certain time frame. And that project was to have, I believe, about 300 doors, that doors being apartments, single-family homes, townhomes, and they have within less than a year got commitments to build all but 9 doors. And so they don't have developers that are resisting that. They have developers that are bracing that, and it's been very successful. And I think we can learn from that. And so that's the point that I was trying to make.
Troy, may I approach, or just make a comment? Yeah. So to your comment about learning from the Legacy Bend and kind of the situation that we've created there, I would say in large part, the issue that has developed there is the developer had no experience in single-family housing, and had experience in multifamily housing. Steve Ramus, just for the record, city engineer. And we have learned from that, and we would be very, very cautious and probably not recommend moving forward with anything where you had a developer that, for a large project like that, that lacked significant experience in either component, multifamily or single family. But I would say from what I see and all the interaction I've had with the developer or the developer's engineers, it was kind of a first time out for them on the single family side, no experience, and I think they got completely upside down on that. And recognized that for them to move forward was probably not going to be a profitable endeavor for them to move forward on that single family housing. They just couldn't figure out how to move it forward. I know we've been having conversations with them. Do they sell off the single family? You know, I know they're engaging with other single family developers trying to possibly look for a partnership there to continue those or something else. But they've pretty much said to us that they just don't have the experience to move the single family home. So I think that in large part is why that came to a halt.
Thanks, Steve.
And just to clarify, those houses, those lots, and a couple of houses that haven't sold, the couple of houses that haven't sold are being rented, and the incremental taxes are going and going to go to pay off that TIF bond. The bare lots that haven't sold have incremental taxes based on the increase in lot values. I haven't looked to see what those are, but I'm sure they would have increased over and above what it would have been if that was still undeveloped bare dirt. That money is going back to all the taxing agencies and is a benefit to the taxing agencies, not a detriment to the taxing agencies. So, yeah, we'd like to have the housing get developed. I'm sure the developer would like to have the housing get developed, but it's not costing us taxes.
I would dispute that, Randy. It is costing the community. The community is providing services to those homes, and the county is providing services to those homes. The schools is providing services to those homes. Every taxing entity is providing services to those homes and apartments, and yet we're not getting any tax revenue from it.
I thought you were talking about the vacant lots.
Well, I'm talking about it overall, but my
The
point
major-
being, as a project, we expected to get a certain level of single-family homes and apartments. That was what was laid out and discussed to the community. So that's why we gave up our tax revenue for that. And when we don't get it, and we gave up our tax revenue, then it's not what the community asked for, what we planned for. That's my point.
I'm not quite sure where I left off on this thing. I think I'm done with that slide. The financial processing and documentation, I think this is what would have been the second agenda item. Documentation for bond issuance. We need to have documentation of the TIFable costs that have been incurred for the amount of the bond. We've got a bond issue, TIF bond issue will be going on the June 2nd CDA agenda. So I happen to have the documentation of those TIFable costs handy. This is phase one of those TIFable costs, kind of like show and tell at school. Most of these come in as an electronic form. This was a nice one I could grab and show what kind of documentation, the amount of documentation we get. And then we also, before the bond issues close, we got to bunch of closing documents, kind of like you do when you close on a mortgage. Redeveloper's closing certificate, certificate of agency treasurer, receipt by redeveloper. You go on down the list, but you can read it there. So that's the kind of documentation we get when we issue a TIF bond. Notice to divide documentation, we talked about that quite a bit already tonight. And like I said, the onus is on the redeveloper. Every redevelopment contract we have says they're responsible to tell us what they want to divide. If they screw that up, that's on them. But we try to make sure they don't screw it up. And we've got some redevelopment contracts that require a lot of documentation, including amendments to the redevelopment contract themselves to divide taxes. Some of them require a redevelopment contract amendment notice. Some of them just require a notice from the redeveloper. The simpler the better. I like it. It's easier for everybody. But the main thing is they got to tell us what they want to divide. And we work with them in that process.
Randy, when you talk about the resolution, that last one on the prior slide, that resolution, that's a CDA resolution?
Correct.
Not a city council resolution?
Correct. One of the things on the agenda is record retention requirements. There's requirements for the city in 2117.04. And there's record retention requirements for the redeveloper. I didn't put down what that section is, but basically those record retention requirements are the same. You got to keep the documents for 3 years after the last of year the taxes were divided for that project. In the city's case, we also have to follow our standard record retention requirements. So those record retention requirements go for a long time, and we've had some state audits come in where they're looking at TIF projects that were like 10 years or more past the time we started them. That was back before these record retention requirements were in statutes, but we had those documents. We've never got any findings on the state TIF audit. We've had, I am thinking, a handful of them over the years. Other back-end financial processing, as we get these tax receipts in, we have to track them by phase because they are specific to a certain bond issue. And once that bond issue is paid, then we tell the county, don't divide taxes anymore. So every 6 months, we take what we have for incremental taxes for that particular TIF bond, and we pay that to the bondholder. And then interest income is also allocated each project by phase on those incremental taxes we get before we spend them. And on the opposite side of that, we got to keep the amortization schedule for each one of those TIF bonds. And so we know as we apply those incremental taxes to it, what's going to interest, what's going to principal, and we know when that's paid off. It used to be a fairly laborious process on Excel spreadsheets, but over the past year, we've been transitioning to an Access database. I think we're still keeping both the spreadsheets and the database, but making sure that those track along with each other. But that database is a big improvement. We're saving like the documents out there in the database and just click on it, bring up the documents. I love it. But there is a lot of back-end financial processing. We're getting enough TIF projects now. We had to do something to make that easier. Questions? Been asking questions as we go along, but I'm sure you probably still have some.
From the process, if a TIF bond is issued, or a TIF project is approved, how do they start getting payments? How does that money, I know it comes from, basically what I'm after, I guess, is in the project we've been discussing off and on, some of the phases that haven't even been started yet, they're just sitting there. Has money been already drawn on the TIF bond for those, or, and then what happens if it's never drawn on? I suppose at the drop dead date, it just goes away, or?
Yes, those TIP bonds will go away. I believe these redevelopment contracts have dates in them by when you're supposed to start the project, when you expect to finish the project, and all of them have wiggle room in there because things happen. Tariffs come on and increase costs, and you can't do them. But if a project was really dead and didn't look like it was going to move forward, and we thought we could do something better with that, we could probably go in, whatever project it be, and try to basically get rid of that contract. We've never done that, so I'm kind of speaking off the cuff here, but if we had something like that come up, I'm sure we would get with TIF council and say, okay, this particular project, whatever it is, isn't moving forward. It said they were planning on starting the project by January 1 of 2024. They haven't even started it. They're supposed to have it completed by December 31, 2025. That isn't going to happen. And we think somebody else could do something with this. What do we do? I think there's probably something that could be done. We've never done that, so like I say, I'm speaking somewhat off the cuff. But there is a lot of wiggle room in these redevelopment contracts simply because of the nature of the thing. Things happen, and you don't want to handcuff a developer so tight that when something happens and his project gets delayed a little bit, that the world comes down on him. Hopefully, we go in and amend the contract if that happened, because you don't want to get a bad reputation amongst the developers. But yeah, there's some language in the redevelopment contract. We probably could do something. But to answer one of your initial questions, until TIFable costs are incurred, there's no principal incurred on a TIF bond.
Sometimes there's a perception that TIF is approved and a giant check is handed out to the developer, and that's what happens. I realize that's not the case, but I think that is a perception at times.
Usually the only money that changes hands when a TIF bond sale closes is a check written to the city's TIF council. That isn't always the case. Some developers' council wants checks to exchange hands. So say we had a $2 million TIF bond, they would want the developer to give the agency a $2 million check to buy the TIF bond, and the agency turn around and give a $2 million check to the redeveloper as a grant for his TIF project. And we've done a handful of those where it's not because we think it's necessary, but it's because the developer's attorney wanted that exchange of checks. But normally, money doesn't change hands when a TIF bond closes.
One other quick question. The city has fees, legal fees on TIF projects, correct? You have to have attorneys look at that. Who pays that, and how does that, what's that process?
The developer pays for the city's TIF council.
I have a question. This goes back to Randy when he was up here talking about the Legacy Bend situation. Currently, does the city, through the city planning commission or city council, now have a vetting process maybe for developers to eliminate a situation like that?
You're referring to Steve?
Yeah. Or who, I'm sorry.
I mean, there's no formal vetting program. All the developers that are working here, we know. It's Dover, Romakers, Randy Walters, Kelby Herman. Those are the big ones. There might be, might be some smaller home builders here that do one-offs on vacant lots throughout the community. Certainly as new ones come in, I remember when Granville Custom Homes came in, they were kind of new to the area, probably 4 years ago, hadn't been doing too much. They bought out Devin Wagner's property, which is the Blackberry property. We had conversations with him about his experience and his background in Columbus, and we looked at that and certainly felt comfortable that him being in the community, with his background would probably, possibly, you get another builder in, maybe it creates some competition, maybe see a little bit of improvement in the housing price. But that was about the extent of any, I don't remember any specific conversations around his asks in terms of TIF or paving districts, but that answer your question? I think that was probably the extent of any formal or informal vetting process there.
Randy, just one question on the documentation from the developer. If hypothetically it's a commercial building and the developer and the TIF is to do repairs or remodeling of that commercial building, and the developer has his own construction company. So the developer's bill is whatever his own company creates. Is there any auditing of that or oversight of that or verification of that?
We would require the outside costs that he incurred to be documented. We would want probably some documentation, because normally about half of this stuff's labor costs of labor that's went into that project. But what you're saying, I think, could happen and could be legit. Makes it a little bit more tough to document those costs.
Thank you.
Randy, when you were talking in the PowerPoint about the workforce housing, you've got a different number. Can you reconcile the number that you used with the number that your TIF council used in that, in what was handed out here today? They're different.
My numbers are from, there was a policy memo issued just a couple weeks ago, maybe not even a couple weeks ago at my request, where they updated their workforce housing numbers. If you've got different numbers than what I've got, that's probably.
He just wrote this yesterday.
What's that?
It looks like, well, it's got a 2024 date on the second page, but on the first date, it looks like he just wrote it yesterday.
What are you referring to?
What?
What are you referring to?
In these questions that were handed out,
Which question?
number 3, the TIF attorney says it's $300,000 for an owner-occupied workforce housing. TIF is $300,000 for an owner-occupied. Randy's was $340,000. So there's quite a disparity there, and I just was looking for that reconciled. It's kind of hard to find what those numbers are supposed to be, because the statute says they're going to increase them every year because of inflation factors, and so
They
they're a
don't.
little bit difficult to locate. But I just wondered, and Mr. Sands is talking about a 2023 policy memo, so I was just wondering
Yeah,
if that could be reconciled.
They didn't update those numbers until I asked for it in 2023, and they didn't update the numbers again until I asked for them in 2025. And those numbers came out May 16th. So those are the new ones that I've got in my numbers. Sounds like that might be old ones that mine are hot off the presses, less than 2 weeks old.
Does anyone on the group that have questions or anything, any of you guys down on the other end, or anybody that hasn't had a chance to chime in or any input? I could start with you. No?
Thanks, Randy. I think that completes your part of the presentation. The next item on the agenda is number 8, and that's to set the date of the next meeting. I know we agreed to the fourth Wednesday of every month, but unfortunately, I won't be able to make it, and there is a stipulation in the resolution that was passed that if any co-chair is not available, that we can change the meeting date or need to change the meeting date. So I'm suggesting a date of July 2nd, and I'm just curious on this group if, how that works with everybody.
I'm not available.
Not available.
What about the following?
Would we have our normal July meeting then on the fourth Wednesday? Which would be the 30th?
We could, I mean, that skips a whole month. I'd rather
No, if
have
we had it
another-
on the 2nd,
Pardon?
if we had it on the 2nd
Of
of
July?
July, would we have our normal?
Yes, I'm
July
sorry,
meeting?
yes, yes.
Well, there is 5 Wednesdays that month too, so if that matters.
I did also potentially ask the city administrator from Columbus if they could talk about Vitality Village at that meeting, if that was the date that we chose, and they are available. Does anybody else have a conflict with that?
Second?
Pardon?
Second?
Yes, July 2nd. You have a conflict with that?
You don't need me here.
So you're not, are you available the 26th?
I don't think I'm available that whole week.
Going over the week ahead?
We could, that would not work with the city administrator from Columbus, but that's okay. We can just do that a different time potentially too. Let me look here.
18th, that would be.
Let me look here. Yeah, that works for me. I don't think that worked for them. What does the 18th look like for everybody? Anybody else have a conflict on that?
I'm available.
Okay. Shoot for the 18th then? Okay. That's what we'll plan. June 18th,
Instead of the 25th, right?
instead of the 25th, correct,
And then there would be the normal meeting on,
in July. Okay. Very good. We will plan our next meeting on June 18th.
I have a question on these documents that were passed out before the meeting. Are any of these going to be made available to the press or the public? And I'm curious because of the second memo from Randy, I guess, talking about the difference in the property tax valuation increase that Mr. Clint was making in the last meeting of 256% and 5 times as fast. I don't know what that was. But it doesn't appear that, at least from this document, that was a correct statement. So is this going to get publicized any way, shape, or form that the public can see? I'm just asking my question. I'm
well,
asking.
and I, just
Okay.
so that it's complete, I'm not interested in the levies. I was talking about the property tax. This is not responsive to that question. I stand by my numbers.
What's the difference between the levies and the property tax and the valuations? It all
There's a
comes into-
heck of a lot of difference between the levies and the property tax.
Well, those are
All
put on
kinds
here.
of difference. And my response came from the governor's, the information from the governor's special assessment, or special session last August. That's where my number came from, and I went back and looked at the numbers. So, I just want you to know that I'm gonna make a response to this because, I would say that Randy's numbers are incorrect.
Well, again, that's an opinion of yours. I haven't done the math, but it doesn't look like from 2014 to 2024, the taxes levied went up 256%. So I just was curious, because we seem to have some, I'll use the word agendas that are getting driven here, and I've been fearful of that since the formation of this committee. And things get said in this public hearing, and then to get a document that isn't going to be made public at the same time. Either rebuttal truthfully, whether it's right or wrong. And I think for the integrity of this whole process, if there are allegations that are proven or disproven, they need to be part of the public record, either in the meeting or given to the public and disseminate it and let them make their own decisions. So that was my question.
I don't have any problem with that, and
Yeah.
I'll provide you the numbers that
Okay,
show
you can-
why mine are correct.
Okay, well, and there's always two answers to every question.
Yes, there are.
And numbers can lead two different directions, so.
Yeah, I have no problems with sharing this with the public. That's part of this whole process, but I do think we didn't have an opportunity, nobody had an opportunity to see
No,
this
we should have
document.
had this before.
Yes,
Yeah,
correct.
absolutely, yeah.
And so had we all had that opportunity to see this in advance, I think that would have been beneficial. But certainly, when Clint made a statement, he has an opportunity to defend that as well. So I think we'll maybe give Clint that opportunity and come back next and make this all public, whatever we need to do. But in the future, I think if there's something that is distributed to this committee, I think it would be beneficial to have that in advance so that the committee can react to it and be ready to react to it at the meeting. Okay, go ahead.
This portion, the final portion here is the public comment section, so if anybody has questions or ideas or input, please come forward and state your name and let us know.
Good evening. My name is Paul Metalman. Just to comment about you were talking about the base values. And the question, first point, or the first paragraph there, whatever the topic was. But there seemed to be some confusion because my base values do not stay the same when I filed for the TIF and for my phase 1 and phase 2. So when I filed for that, the original tax value of each lot was maybe $3,000-4,000 or something. But I started selling lots, and the tax assessor has come in and appraised or assessed all of my lots now that aren't sold at almost fair market value. So I'm paying a considerable amount of taxes. I have 10, I think, vacant lots yet that haven't sold. So I'm paying near appraised value on those lots, and so it's not a freebie to me. And plus my value on the property, lake property, that isn't in any phases currently, has assessed, he's raised those a little bit also. So I'm paying more. And just to let you know that the base is not the base when I started the project. It goes up until that lot's sold. And I can't, if I file, I can't file for separation. Well, I can, but I lose the value of the house coming on that lot. So I I wait and absorb, or I have to pay the taxes on that lot until I sell it, but I do not divide that taxes until the home is on that lot. So I'm giving up the 80, 90, 100,000 they have them assessed at to wait for the bigger value of the home coming on there. So it's a little bit of misconception there that I'm not paying anything on taxes out there when in fact I am. So, and the city is not at risk, in my opinion, for anything out there. I have all the monies are borrowed from my bank. My bank collects all the money from the TIF. It goes to the bank. I pay the interest there. So it's, all of the responsibility is on the developer and not the city, except for the example you were talking about, legacy bin. So.
Hey, Paul, I have a question.
Yes.
Are you interested in doing more TIF projects after having gone through a TIF project or not?
Well, yes, I am, because I brought that to the city as a phased project, and there's 8, 10, 11, I don't know, whatever phases in that. I would like to bring that concept and the cost of that TIF, or the development cost to me, were extremely high in the beginning, and I don't start to realize a return of anything
Until the bond.
substantial until I get into the last phases. So that's where I'm at. And so if the city cuts my legs off, it's a big hit. So I hope that in the future they, continue their support for that development out there, even though they're large homes. I'm not building the homes. I'm not living on the homes. I'm trying to get fair market value for Norfolk. That same lot, I might say, in Omaha, $500,000 and $600,000. So you can't get it here. I'm probably over the price as it is right now. So, and those other developments, you guys have to realize the economy has a little bit to do with all that. Things stopped because of the economy slowed. So interest rates are high. People are not borrowing the money. They're waiting. There's just economics involved in all this stuff too. So I would love to have all my lots sold. I have 5 or 6 on the water yet that haven't, so, and some off-lake lots, so it's a gamble. So, any questions? I guess I'll try to answer them.
Good evening, Roger Nadler. I thought I was just going to be here to listen, but there's a couple comments I wanted to share with you. Being a developer here in Norfolk and in Columbus, it's been said a few times that the developer is the one that's in risk. If they are the developer and owning the bonds, and there's no assessment of that, the developer has all the risk in those subdivisions. If the houses don't get paid or built, there's no tax to pay off those bonds. So at the end of 15 years, there's not enough real estate that's been built over those 15 years to pay off the bonds. The developer is responsible for paying off those bonds at that time. That's my take on that, as well as nobody has said tonight about the benefit to the community after the TIF bond period, after the 15 years, the millions of dollars of real estate that are there, that tax are being paid and coming to the taxing entities. So keep that in mind, that yes, during those 15 years, the tax is not going to the taxing entity, the increment of taxes. But after 15 years, voila, there's a lot of taxes coming to the community and to the other taxing entities. So I have not heard anybody say that tonight, but keep that in mind, what the benefit is to the community at that time.
And it can be less than 15 years.
Right, a lot of times it is. Like our North Park, I'm guessing we'll probably be paying that off, the bonds are paid off about maybe 11, 12 years. So, okay.
The average of our payoffs was 9.7 years, I think it was, on
Okay.
that sheet that we had.
I can look up our North Park subdivision, what that projection is, but I don't have that with me tonight. Okay, thank you.
But even if the payoff is sooner, it's the same number of tax dollars that the public entities don't receive. It's just that they're received sooner. That the developer gets them sooner. It's the same dollars.
Same dollar, the time frame is but sooner.
Okay, thanks.
I think, Paul Mettleman again, I think you need to realize, Jim, that every TIF project has met the statute's requirements, the city's requirements. The properties have been declared blighted, substandard, per the statutes. And most importantly, they have met the but-for clause. And in my case, I would not have proceeded with my development if I had not have TIF. So the but-for clause was very important for me, and I think every TIF developer, or every developer relies on that. And a lot of projects would not happen but for that.
Yeah, and we'll have a lot of debate on that later.
I'm here.
We're not gonna go into that right now, but there will be a lot of time for discussion on that issue. And I'll just, in regards to meeting all the requirements, state law in Nebraska on TIF is extremely poorly written, and it's wide open, and it says to be liberally construed. I can give you a book that calls Nebraska's TIF laws, and they've looked at TIF projects across the country, and they call Nebraska the de-evolution of TIF, which means Nebraska's laws are probably the worst, I would assume, that they've seen in the nation, because of, pretty much anything goes in Nebraska.
Well, I would disagree with you, but there's 49 states that use TIF in the United States, and I think there's 139 cities in Nebraska that have used TIF and still use TIF.
Yeah, I will say California was the first to adopt TIF and the first to get rid of TIF, because it was bankrupting the state. And so they got rid of TIF, and then they came out with some new things I'll call TIF Light, which extremely restricted TIF compared to what it used to be because of the financial impact on the state of California.
Great. The state of California is severely in debt too. Not because of TIF.
We are adjourned. Thank you.